All right, so looking at chapter 12, the Americas, pre-Columbian empires till the colonies. In this chapter, you're going to learn about the earliest civilizations in the Americas, the voyage of Columbus across the Atlantic in 1492 to reach Asia, and how this voyage led to the first encounter between Europeans and Native Americans. The effect of this on the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. So we see the different empires at the time: pre-Columbian empires, Aztecs, the Mayans, and then the Incas. And here, of course, is your 4 trips made by Columbus as he comes to the Americas. So your short answer questions for this week. Okay, what are the major characteristics of the Maya, Inca, Aztec, and the Aztec civilizations? So just like we've covered in every chapter, talking about the major characteristics, accomplishments of those groups. And how did the voyages of Christopher Columbus forever change the world? So what we have here, of course, is Columbus. And then again, you have your different empires on a map. Vocabulary, we'll be going over those during class. So first, Americas. So scientists believe that during the Ice Age, Asia and Alaska were attached by a land bridge where the Bering Straits are found today. So here's the Bering Straits. And during the Ice Age, this area was actually all land. So your darker blue areas were all land. So eventually, over time, following the woolly mammoths, those different groups coming kind of out of Mongolian areas come into North America. So as long as 25,000 years ago, groups of Asian hunters crossed the land bridge in search of food. And of course, they were following the migration of different animals and herds that were coming into North America. From Alaska, these earliest Americans spread southward. Over time, these people multiplied and spread throughout North America, Central America, the islands of the Caribbean, and South America. Separated by vast mountains and dense jungles, what happens is, of course, they're going to develop different cultures. So these people developed their own separate languages and cultures. They settled along lakes and rivers where they had fresh water to drink. So a lot like the early river valley civilizations that we talked about. So Native Americans experienced their own Neolithic revolution. So learning how to farm, raise crops, things like that. Their crop was different though. They learned how to grow corn and other crops, but corn would be the main one. So several complex civilizations emerged in Mesoamerica, which is Central America and Mexico. Historians refer to these civilizations as pre-Columbian because they existed in the Americas before the arrival of the explorer Columbus in 1492. Unlike early civilizations of Africa and Eurasia, the first Native American civilizations did not emerge in all river valleys. So they're not like the original 4 river valleys. Some of these groups actually developed along the Yucatan Peninsula, the valleys of Mexico. So Native Americans living in warm, humid rainforests of Mesoamerica learned to plant corn, a crop unknown to the people of Africa, Asia, and Europe. Corn became the basic food crop in the Americas, supporting the development of permanent settlements and large cities. So first group, the Maya. So among the earliest civilizations in the region were the Olmecs and Toltecs. So these people were even there before the Mayans. Over 3,000 years ago, the Mayan developed a complex civilization in present-day Guatemala, so down here in Central America. Each Mayan city had its own chief ruler, so it'd be almost like a city-state who was considered half man, half god. Most Maya were peasant farmers who lived in thatched huts and grew corn. There's also a small class of craftsmen who made luxury for the nobles, which we've talked about a lot already. So the nobles, the landowners, the wealthy, and at the top you're going to have the royal family. The nobility were a small hereditary class, so they got their power from their parents, who performed sacred ceremonies on special occasions and assisted the rulers. Mayan astronomers measured the movements of the sun, moon, and Venus to predict the future. So here's the structure as you would see it. So you would have your workers at the bottom, merchants and artisans, people who made things, sold things, your nobles, your wealthy landowners, and then the royal family, and then of course the priests at the top. Here's a map of the Mayan area. They start in Guatemala, but eventually they move into the Yucatan Peninsula. Here's some Olmec statues, which we talked a lot about in class. And here's one actually being dug up at the time. These are also Olmec, I wouldn't say sculptures, but kind of pottery sculptures. So, of course, very different. We talked about that in class, how these are African features and then these are Asian features. And this would be an observatory for the stars, for astronomy, and things like that. All right, so the Maya engaged in frequent wars and practiced human sacrifice. So they had to go out and gather people to sacrifice. They developed the ball game that became popular throughout the Americas. What you would have is two teams compete in a rectangular court, each attempting to hit a solid rubber ball into wooden rings. Archaeologists believe the game had a religious significance. The losing team was sometimes sacrificed to the gods after the game. So it's a game played with a rubber ball and pretty much off of your hip. So pretty tough game to play. Here's the court. This is drawn during the Spanish times. And then they actually play on a slanted slope away from the rectangular field. And it's still played today, so kind of in ceremonies and things like that. There's a net up here. And this, of course, is where you're trying to get the rubber ball through the ring. So around the 9th century, Mayan culture experienced a great crisis. Archaeologists do not know if it was a food shortage, epidemic, or a great war that brought the end to the classical period of the Mayan civilization, so their golden era. So the Mayan migrated north, leaving all their temples. They left north to the Yucatan Peninsula, and that's in present-day Mexico. There they built a whole new series of city-states. One of the later Mayan cities, which is well preserved, is Chichen Itza. Constant warfare from the 13th to 16th century, pressure from other neighboring wandering people led to the final decline of the Mayan civilization. So here's Chichen Itza, what it would have looked like back then. Here's, of course, one of their pyramid temples. This is an actual aerial photo of Chichen Itza, and then this is what would be their typical Mayan home would look like. So Mayan achievements, builders, they built huge cities in the jungle with large palaces, temples, and pyramids. Writing system, they had hieroglyphics. Okay, so we talked about that when we talked about China already. They were extremely skilled in math and science. They developed complex numbering system. They used zero. They had a calendar of 365 days to keep track of the changing seasons. In artistry, most of their buildings were colored. Colorful murals to decorate the pyramids, palaces, and temples. They developed the ball game, played in a rectangular court, became popular throughout the Americas. All right, so the Aztec. Here's some of your different Aztec gods, which we did Quizlet over. So what you have is the Valley of Mexico, which is in central Mexico, and has a high elevation. So it's going to be a temperate climate. So ranging from 70 to topping out at 80 degrees. It could even get cooler than that. So it's perfect for growing crops. The Aztecs were actually an alliance of several different local people to start with. And around 1300, they settled on the island in the center of Mexico, of the Valley of Mexico. They learned to grow corn from their neighbors in order to survive. They grew crops in floating gardens. Okay, so these are wet, marshy lands that they actually lived in to start with. As you can see here, this is the Valley of Mexico. So they made careful observations of the sky and aligned their temples based on the movements of the sun and the moon. Over the next 2 centuries, the Aztecs engaged in frequent wars to conquer other people in the region. These conflicts continued until the arrival of the first Europeans in the Americas. So here's your floating gardens, and actually there was almost like a weaving underneath this, and then dirt put on top. So it's a way to use areas that have more water than what you actually need. Because this is the area that this is the chosen area that they had. So here's a good picture of them with the weaving and then the dirt on top, and that's where the plants would actually grow. Here's some other depictions of it. Still done in places like Iraq today along the Tigris and Euphrates. So this is pretty much what the Spanish would have saw when they came in. This would be Tenochtitlan, which becomes Mexico City. So the Aztecs developed highly complex social organization. At the top was the all-powerful emperor, just like the Mayans. Below the rulers were the nobles who often held high positions in the government, army, or priesthood. Most people were commoners, though, worked as farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, or as warriors in the Aztec armies. At the bottom is going to be your slaves. Aztecs worshiped many gods. The most important was the sun god. The observation of the sky made it possible to construct accurate calendars of stone. So the Aztecs believed that the sun god needed human blood to continue his daily journeys across the sky. For this reason, the Aztecs practiced human sacrifice on a massive scale. So conquered warriors from other tribes were sacrificed as well as Aztecs who volunteered for this honor. Okay, so they believed that they were doing this in honor to keep the universe in motion. So this would be a knife used during the sacrifices. This is kind of what the Spanish saw when they came to the Americas, and pulling out the beating heart was a big part of the ritual. These would be your Aztec gods over here on the left. Some of these we studied on Quizlet, and this would be their language. So this would be their hieroglyphics. Okay, so each symbol meant something. Each drawing actually meant something. Here would be their tools, and of course, this would be the main weapon that the Aztecs used. This is going to be it's actually going to be volcanic glass on the side. And then here's the Aztec calendar, which is exactly the same as the Mayan calendar.